Okay.
Sorry, extension.
Just doing a quick test. Hello, I'm here. Hi. All good with sound? Still?
program cycle as well. In the new guidance, we've attempted to really simplify and lighten the processes. So the work that the clusters need to do requires less box ticking. But I mean, the question still is very pertinent, and it still is very challenging, particularly if you're working across different sectors or if you're a smaller organization, to try and be represented in all of those different cluster meetings. It's about better communication. It's about making the best use of resources. Not everything requires a meeting with 200 people. Can we communicate better on the internet? We've done a lot of work around website management. So it's really being flexible and thinking through ways of working better together and having a more focused strategic plan. So how the question still is very key to have this very challenging plan, and that sectors really remain focused on key priorities and how we measure those key priorities. And not try and do everything, and really come together at key points of the program cycle where we can be most effective. So again, the protocols don't provide a panacea, or they don't answer all of the concerns, but it helps guide and give different maybe options or different ways of thinking of how to simplify and keep focused. So we do lighten the load and lighten the number of meetings and the high expectations of organizations working within the system. Thanks, Panos.
Something? Thanks, I'd like to bring Patty in also. Patty, over to you.
I just wanted to briefly highlight, Panos, on that we have the operational peer reviews, and the operational peer reviews, of which there's another webinar. So again, we can put the link up so people can review that independently. I mean, that was one of the findings, is that balance, and that we haven't got it right between coordination and implementation. And I think Gwyn has spoken, about okay, these are some of the areas we need to be addressing, and so there is an awareness of it. But almost with any change, we have to find the balance, and I think initially, it's also about keeping the intentions in a sense within our judgment, and keeping that in mind as we go forward. Is okay, we're looking at too much coordination initially, maybe as a result of certain aspects of the TA, especially on the level of crises. But I guess is the intent to be over-communicating, or is it to try and be responsive to the change? And if it's trying to be but how do you get that balance? I mean, as with anything, when you're learning, possibly go a little overboard if it takes a while to find that center. And that's why the value of the operational peer reviews is so critical, and also the STAIT itself, the senior TA implementation team, because it's automatically set up a tool, a mechanism to monitor and to look at, okay, actually, these are some things that are working well. These are some things we're not working so well. And it's not, is it a failing of the policy? Or is it a failing of the implementation? And failing is maybe too strong a word, but is that where the issue is? And it allows us to kind of correct the course and explore how do we do it better in the current crisis, but also look at how we can try and do it better in the future. And I think that is one of the aspects of this reform that is different from the prior, in that there is that reflection, not navel gazing, but reflection with the countries themselves to look at how they can continue to improve.
Thanks, Patty. I would like to ask all of you really to mute your microphones. We still hear a background noise from one of you, which comes through to all of us. Patty, thanks for the additional clarification. And indeed, if I also can come in the operational peer reviews that we have undertaken this year in the Philippines, in Central African Republic, in Southern Sudan, but also the TA support missions in a couple of countries so far, indeed highlight the fact that while with this reform we have tried to make sure that we will coordinate one another, we have the various platforms, perhaps we have gone a little bit overboard in some situations and forgotten that the main objective of all of this is really delivery. And we have seen in some situations where actually the coordination staff outnumbered the staff that were there for delivery. And this is something that all of us, while we're in a crisis, I think it's absolutely worth it to take a minute and look at the structure, look at the architecture of coordination and review it. Actually, the protocols ask us to be able to adjust it according to the situation. do we need to have all clusters in the capital and in each of the field locations? Is it possible to combine some of them across teams? Is it possible to make it lighter in order to really be more fit for purpose, to also free more time for colleagues to be able to do other things? Is it always driven by the cluster lead agency flag, so to speak, rather than really the need of what needs to happen on the ground? And the TA does say, actually, you can tailor make it, you can put things together, if that makes it lighter, if that makes it more efficient in terms of delivery. And this is indeed one of the lessons we have seen from the field. I'd like to move into another question we got from one of the participants, saying one aspect of the humanitarian reform that doesn't seem to be highlighted enough in the transformative agenda is partnership. Can you comment on this? So, Patty or Gwyn, would you like to comment a little bit more on the partnership aspect that the caller is saying it is not highlighted enough in the TA?
Can you give presenter rights to?
I can come in on that. You know, it's interesting because it's similar. Criticism was made of humanitarian reform the first time around, and it was later. You know, the principles of partnership and the good humanitarian platform were basically a response to that. And yet, when we did this new transformative agenda, somehow it was again implied. And it's interesting. I mean, it's a very good question, and it challenges us to what is it about partnership that it becomes so implied, and there's less of a drive that to write it out to make sure it's clear or clearer to everyone. I mean, one of the aspects of the TA I think that's interesting is as this was going on, UNHCR carried out a structured dialogue with its partnerships. UNICEF held a global consultation with partners. WFP reinvigorated their partnership discussions that they had maybe had a hiatus on for a while. So I mean, you have three of the large UN organizations who, at the same time as they were engaged in the IASC processes on the transformative agenda, which is the interagency level, began looking at how they themselves are partners with many others, including the NGOs, and actually almost primarily with the NGOs. And so that may have been one of the reasons why there was less drive to say, well, how do we write this out? I think there was also an understanding that partnering, it's one of the things which it's hard to write a policy on partnering. I mean, we can write what the principles are, we can write what it should look like, but we have so many levels and layers and ways we partner with each other. We partner as donors, we partner as experts together, we partner within the cluster, we partner alongside each other as implementers, NGOs partner together as well. And how do you write one guidance that explores and examines all these various ways of partnering? So it's not to say that it wasn't part of our conversations. It was, but I think it was a question of, if we achieve what we're asking for, which is people to work together, if they, sit in the humanitarian country team and put their organizational hats aside and look at their responsibilities to the collective, does that bring about the partnership that we're exploring, that we're looking for? Also, can we find implementing partnerships to be less power dynamics and more about reaching further? These are things which maybe it's hard to do at a multiple agency level. It is an interagency dynamic, but donor relationships are not multi-agency usually, and so we have to find a way to continue to work on it. But I think there are some successes already in terms of exploring it and dialoguing on it. But it is as they say, the foundation of a lot of the transformative agenda. But I've never been satisfied with that answer alone. I think it's a work in progress, because the foundation means that I don't know, if it's not strong enough, all will falter. I think it's actually part of the process as a whole. It's something about how we are actually needing to, we're in a way, we're building the foundation at the same time as implementing the TA, because if that foundation isn't strong enough, We won't go further with the transformative agenda, but there are certain things we can do within the transformative agenda at the same time that we're building our partnership work together.
Thanks, Patty. I can see we're inundated with so many questions now that are coming from our listeners. A series of questions are related to the accountability to affected people. So there's a couple of questions on that saying, being accountable to the affected people, it feels a little bit like a headquarters jargon. What does it mean practically? How do we take accountability to affected people to the field? Second question is on AAP, is asking whether AAP has become an umbrella for all cross-cutting issues, gender, disability. So how much more progress has been made on this discussion? Another question I see in front of me is how successful has the rollout of the AAP been so far? So Patty or Gwyn, a series of questions on AAP. Please come in.
Thanks, Panos. Maybe I'll come in. I mean, they're all very good questions, and the accountability to affected population is a commitment that was made by the IAC principles, and as we mentioned before, is one of the fundamental aims of the transformative agenda. But it does get quite jargony particularly when we're trying to write policies or protocols around accountability to affected populations. Ultimately, what we are talking about is ensuring that we're listening, we're getting feedback, and that we're acting on the feedback from the people that we're supporting or that we're serving. It's thinking through how, within a needs assessment, that we're consulting men, women, boys, girls, vulnerable groups within a community, and that we're taking those needs into account when we're developing our programming. That when our program has been developed, that we're also consulting to make sure it's the right type of program, that we're addressing of those most affected. So conceptually it becomes quite jargony because it's quite difficult to articulate how as a system or how as a collective working within a cluster in a particular country, how we can ensure that we're doing that throughout the program cycle. But ultimately, the idea behind it is very simple. And it's an idea that as humanitarians, I think we do best. For many of us, the reason we become humanitarians is really so that we can engage and we can work with and we can listen to and we can support people who are living through a crisis. So it's how we make sure that's done in a systematic way, and how we take it into account. Under the reform, coming back to the point on partnership, that was really the fundamental issue that the reform wanted to address, is how we partner better together and how we work better together. I think the transformative agenda has taken us a step further, and it's asked the question about how we work better together in order to address the needs of vulnerable people, and that's why accountability is so challenging, and why it's so fundamental to the TA. So. And there has been a lot of discussions coming to the question on whether it's the umbrella for all cross-cutting issues. There has been an attempt to look at how we integrate all of these quality aspects, how we make sure that we're taking care of people with HIV/AIDS in our response, how we're taking care of vulnerability, how we're addressing protection or gender-based violence issues. So it becomes quite challenging sometimes to think about all of these individual aspects that we need to bring into our programs. So accountability really helps us, the accountability framework really helps us think about how we do that in a systematic way across the program cycle. So it's not an umbrella, but it's the how we do it and how we ensure that those cross-cutting issues are integrated into our programs. It has been a challenge to roll out this systematic way of thinking to country offices. And to countries. It varies so widely within each context. There is technology, innovation, Twitter, feedback loops, all of these things need to be taken into account. How we communicate needs to be taken into account. So I think we have some very specific, very successful examples how our organizations have strengthened their accountability, but as a system, it's still a challenge to roll it out in a more coherent and systematic way. So we are working together, country examples, and there has been a lot of effort to put advisors in, particularly in large-scale emergencies, so that they can really think through and help clusters and organizations think through how we can strengthen our accountability. But like all elements of the TA, I think it's a continuous work, and we continuously have to strive to think about how we can do things better, and how we don't, and how to move away from process meetings and really engage and be smarter in how we work. Thanks, Panos.
Thanks, Gwyn, and if I can be a little bit more self-critical, I would say that of all the protocols, the one on accountability to affected people is the one that is written still pretty much on a high level. I know that the working group on the accountability to affected people at the moment are preparing a more practical guidance in terms of how to ensure this collective engagement at the ATT, at the intercluster, at the cluster level, and bring this feedback and adjust the program and go back to the communities to have this back and forth dialogue. It is still not happening. On the positive side, accountability to affected area is one of the areas that in all the missions we have done is the highest rated by all humanitarian actors who say we are committed, we want to do it in a better way, please give us more practical steps how to do it collectively in the best possible way. The NGOs, the INGOs are far more advanced. I would say that the UNHs, some UNHs are better than others, but still there is a long way to go to make sure that we all hear that collective feedback on a country level are able to adjust our program as we go through. I'd like to move to another question. There's questions about the role of the donors in the transformative agenda and the role of the host governments in the transformative agenda. Would Patty or Gwyn, any of you want to say very briefly words on the role of the donors or the host governments?
I can come back on it. The role of the donors is I think they've been incredibly engaged on the transformative agenda from the very beginning. So they actually have regular meetings with the IESC to explore how well it's being implemented, and to keep an eye on looking at not just the protocols themselves, but following the operational peer review, following the work of the senior TA implementation team, following different the NGO community has done quite a few surveys and discussion points at country level, looking at how to gather this information. So is this working? Is this making a change? Does this actually mean that we're getting to where we need to be? They're very involved. So I would say that that people should rest easy, that at least in that side they are watching, and they are looking at is this enough? Is this going to make the change that people want to see happen in terms of of working better? For the governments, this is one of those complicated questions that I think everyone the correct answer, the one that we all strive for, is that the government is at the center of the response, and we should be following their lead. Unfortunately, if there's often a very strong government, fortunately, if there's a very strong government, they don't need us. They're not requiring our assistance, and then it becomes a challenge in places like where there's a conflict. How do we actually engage with the government on these areas when they themselves are possibly part of the issue at bay for the that are affecting the actual populations themselves in terms of possibly a conflict, for example. We like to focus on the simpler solutions in our policies, which is the Philippines, where natural disaster, we have a government which needs help, but is very enabled, has strong capacities themselves, and just needs a buffer behind them. And a lot of the policies, in fact, are often written for that scenario. Strong government, center of everything, really helping to be the main coordinator. The challenge, and I just want to reiterate the point Gwyn made earlier about flexibility. The protocols are requiring that the people on the ground know the context, that the people on the ground are smart enough, which they are, because that's why they're there, to explore how does this mean, what does this mean to us? We're not going to blindly follow this policy, but we're going to look at what does this mean within our context? How do we bring the government into this response in the best way possible for both their own engagement and them upholding their own responsibilities under international humanitarian law, but also to ensure that the populations themselves are served in the way that they need to be, that we maintain our principles to the extent possible. So there is that underlying tension, shall we say, about that response that we need to still work out, but it really requires the development actors, the humanitarian actors, all of us on the ground to be talking and speaking and working together and saying, what is working well here? How do we ensure that that ownership is here? And if it's not there, how do we get work with the government to get there, and themselves take a greater responsibility for this aspect of our work, of their responsibilities, or to take this work away from us and to do it themselves.
Thanks, Patty. I'm going to refer very briefly to one last question that came for STAIT, which I'm going to respond myself before wrapping up this webinar. And the question is about, will a work smart guidance manual be drafted and made public by STAIT to bring forward the best practices or what you have seen in the field? And I'd like to say that actually, so there is a webinar we just presented on the operational peer review, reflections, and most critical issues in terms of how to take things forward. And this is really, you can find it on the STAIT website, where we looked at the best practices or common issues that we have come so far in all these big operations that we have gone through. We're not planning to put a work smart guide out, but obviously through a series of webinars, and I want to say today's webinar is the second webinar in a series. There's more webinars coming up focusing on several of these issues that you've talked about: AAP, strategy of protection, coordination, lessons learned from different aspects of what was presented today are in the webinars that are coming up as we are further unrolling this TA webinars series. So I also want to highlight that there is a questionnaire that has popped up, really asking you to give us feedback on today's webinar. But before closing that, I'd like really to say what we're here today, Patty and Gwyn really talk about, is the need for everybody to really use your common sense. Tailor-make your response to your own context. Really work together to bring this cultural shift, this common approach to question, to adjust, to adapt, to better focus in terms of the priorities, in terms of telling the story, in terms of putting the affected people in the middle of the response, and don't hesitate to tailor-make it and challenge the context that you have to see what makes common sense on the ground. None of these protocols are designed in order to be applied 100% and fit all contexts. That's really impossible, and that's why we have these seminars, we have these webinars in order to better guide. I also want to point out that the fact that there is an IC website that lists all the webinars. You can see the website reference in front of you. There is also a STAIT website where we have information on past and upcoming webinars and the issues that we have seen. I also want to highlight actually the work of STAIT, which is, as Patty was saying earlier on, is really a group of people involving UN and NGOs that we try to work together in terms of tailor-making and better supporting specific countries. So if you have a specific question for your situation, do not hesitate to write to us and come back with the feedback. We're almost 2 minutes past the hour, so I really want to, first of all, thank all the attendees. I see we remain with a very high attendance to the very end of this webinar. I hope you all found it useful. I hope really you've come up with a better understanding about the TA framework and what it actually means. These two words that as cold as they sound, transformative agenda, actually how to bring it in life in your own operation in order to ensure a more effective, real change from each individual of us, working really towards bringing together a more accountable, collective response. Really, each of us counts on the role we play in order to bring this change forward. I would like to particularly thank our speakers, Patty and Gwyn, for participating really in the middle of the night from the East Coast of the United States, and really a warm welcome and thank you to all of us who have stayed with us to the very end. That brings an end to this session. Thank you and goodbye, everybody.
Did you just close it?
Yeah.
Oh, because people are doing the poll.
Oh.
And we wanted to try and keep Patty and Bing online. We were just going to put the attendees.
Sorry.
Can you restart it?
Let me see.